I'd be remiss to point out that anything that I'm going to tell you right now would not be possible without the help of a large team of people. And I say that not just with my co-authors, but when we looked at it for the number of volunteer man-hours that the Riverhead Foundation receives each year, it's about $480,000 worth of man-hours that we receive from our volunteers to help us go out. And oddly enough, that does not include what you guys do by calling in and letting us know where these animals are. So let's see if I can work this. Nope, not that one. There we go. When Mike asked me to give this talk, he said he wanted me to talk about populations of marine mammals, and I guess we threw sea turtles in there as well. To make the talk really short, we could just say what we know about the populations. We don't really have good population numbers of any of the marine mammals or sea turtles in our waters. It's something that we've been looking at for years and trying to get an idea of what those populations are, and it's been more of an evolution of getting a lot of the managers to start thinking about populations on a much broader scale. The only program that we have that's been consistent over 3 decades is the stranding program, which is what the Riverhead Foundation operates. So what I'm going to do is going to give you a little introduction to that, a little history of strandings and sightings, and then talk about some of the surveys that we've done, and hopefully try to bring this picture together and let you know where we are right now. To point out, once again, we are part of a network here. You can see that there's the Riverhead Foundation. For our stranding network, it ranges from Virginia all the way up to Maine. And I point this out mainly because when we were looking at it and looking at the census, this serves a population of about 56 million people, and about half of them are, based on NOAA's website, half of them work in or live in a coastal environment. So obviously, since the hurricane, we understand how dramatic that could be, but we also realize that they're interfacing with these animals on a regular basis, and there's still a lot of information we don't know. What's the diversity up and down the coast? When we looked at it, we realized that we have about 7,500 people per nautical mile of coastline is what our density would be if we just looked at the numbers. Maine has 3. So when you look at the comparison, there's a lot of different issues that we want to think about. This is the coverage area for the Riverhead Foundation. It's obviously a blue state. We've learned that a week ago. So in this case here, you can see that we handle all the way up the Hudson. We handle Staten Island, Long Island. And I point that out because when we first started, I started back in the 90s. It was very unusual for us to have animals that were going up the Hudson. There is an account that I remember reading from a Museum of Natural History in the 1800s about the first stranding of a harbor seal. And they were explaining how this was a stranded animal, and they saw it and they shot it. So that does not meet our criteria for a stranded animal anymore. But years ago, we did have animals that were up in these areas. We're going to forget this one because I don't know where this photo came from. Oh, actually, yeah, there you go. This is the aquarium where we're located. They have the Hyatt that's built here. Our facility is right here. This is kind of giving you an indication of the aquarium is built all around us. It's given us a place to actually house. This tank right here is a 30-foot diameter cetacean tank for rehabilitating dolphins. We currently have a harbor porpoise in there that we're rehabilitating, which came from Maine because we are the only tank in the Northeast region. And actually, I'm sorry for being late. The other thing that occurred is that we were actually being inspected by NOAA this morning to look at our facility because they were going to do it the day after the hurricane, and they thought that was a bad idea. So what do? We do rescue work. We rehabilitate animals. This is a Rizzo's dolphin that we rehabilitated. We do releases. We include the public in releases because what we realize is that the public is going to be out there on a regular basis, and they're going to be interacting, and they usually don't know who to call. So by getting them involved in this, we can start getting them to understand how to interact with the public or how not to interact with the public. And then we do this, and we've all spoken to adults for years, and we realize, well, that's kind of useless. Let's start talking to kids. So we start doing education programs and do outreach. And what you see here is a school program that we run where this is a fiberglass dolphin. And what we do is we teach the students what they would see us do and what they should not do in the events of a stranding. Unfortunately, we live on Long Island, 7,500 people. We went out for one of our classes, put this fiberglass dolphin on the beach, then walked back to the site. We came back and someone stole our dolphin. So that's a bad thing, but the interesting part about that is you wonder what you see and what you don't see out there. There's a lot of stories of that. Mike, you have a great battle trying to get information from the public. We need to get that word out there more. And the kids are the ones who are going to make mom and dad call, and that's where we have to focus, and they will do this. These kids really have a better understanding. In all the years I've done strandings, the best people to work with were the kids. We do research. We do shipboard surveys to count seal populations. We do radio tracking. This is one of the planes that we use. We do satellite tracking. So what we've done by employing the animals that we use through the rescue program is we tried to answer some questions. The first question we had was whether or not rehabilitated animals actually go back and act like normal animals. whether or not you can release seals at any time of the year. And what we found is that you can release them any time of the year. They'll figure out what they're doing. We actually found that out with a Rizzo's dolphin, which I might talk about a little bit later, that you can pretty much just put these animals out into the marine environment and they'll find their way to wherever they want to go. And I say that because every time you put out one of these tags, or at the beginning of my career, every time we would put one out, I'd be getting on the phone and people were like, oh yeah, that's really bad. It's going where we don't know, or that's not a good sign. And every data set showed that maybe they do go there. So our data set is really growing. We do seal cruises. We usually keep the people in the boat. But we point this out because this is an occurrence where a seal actually was hanging out in someone's boat. This is in Montauk Harbor. And actually, I see Artie out here. He operates a sighting network as well. But the public are a great source of information. This report of this animal here was an elderly couple who were retired, and they happened to call in and said they had a seal. And they actually monitored this seal for 3 days until it actually took off and went. And every day they called in, and we realized that that's a great source of information. We haven't heard from him since, and this seal looked like it really didn't need any help from us. And that's the next part of our statement here, is that 20 years ago when you saw a seal on the beach, it probably did need help. Now when you see seals on the beach, it doesn't mean that it needs help. I mean, it might just be out there. So there's a lot more information that we need from the public. Fortunately, we have camera phones and iPhones and all those, so we're able to get photos from the public and be able to answer some of these questions without sending resources all over Long Island. The seal cruises, these are some of the seals that we've seen. We do this in Hempstead Bay. I point this out because all of what we know about looking at haul-out sites, we would usually do that at low tide, and Hempstead Bay happens to be the one area where, on this marsh, where they haul out at high tide. So when we first started this over a decade ago, we were seeing a handful of seals. The last seal surveys that we did last winter, we were seeing about 100, 150 animals on these haul-out sites. And the interesting part is you can only get to it at high tide, so they only were hauling out at high tide. So we thought that was pretty interesting information. Okay, this is just giving you an indication of what we really see through our stranding program. These are not population numbers. These are just what we pick up and bring into our facility. This is not the number of calls that we see. This is basically numbers that came into our facility. Blue represents cetaceans, so whales, dolphins, or porpoise. Green represents sea turtles. And then the red represents seals. We pick red because they're kind of the ones that keep us in the red all the time for our foundation. What you can see is that in the 80s, seals were not encountered very readily. It was the late 80s when we started to see the introduction of harp seals. And then it was the early 90s where harp seals became the most commonly encountered animal that we would recover through the rescue program. These green boxes here are the cold sunning events that occurred basically back in the 80s when sea turtles were washing up cold sun, which is what could happen this time of year right now. And cetaceans, you can see that they're smattering. The numbers are going up. We have an event here in 2007. That was the first mass stranding of cetaceans in New York that we have ever seen recorded. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Giving you an indication of what this actually tells us from stranding data. And once again, I'm bringing all this up because all of this is funded through donations from the public to run our facility. It is not funded as a result of going out and doing research. And if you look at this, you can see that January through May is a peak time for seal strandings. It also, March and April are the busiest times. Okay, you can also see that sea turtles, no surprise, occur during the summer months with this little peak here in January, which is probably left over from December. And you see that cetaceans kind of occur throughout the year. Oddly enough, when we started doing our counts, these numbers actually represent what's going on out there. We'll see more seals out here during March and April, so we see more strandings. And that's kind of where we started looking at our data a little bit. What do we see? We have 5 species of seals that we encounter on a regular basis, with the top 2, harbor seal and gray seals, being the population of seals that we actually feel are U.S. populations, and then the bottom 3, harp seal, which is an Arctic seal, hooded seal, which is an Arctic seal as well. It's really a cool animal. It has a lactation period of 4 days, so it's weaned from its mother in 4 days. We think we've had a handful of these. We've had them also stranding in the Caribbean. So when we look at stranding trends, we don't really use these animals other than the fact that they're really cool. And then we have a ring seal, and a ring seal is another Arctic species seal. And we talk about this because I have a satellite track of one of these animals a little bit later. We only had 7. So once again, the satellite track of an N of 1 was really, well, an N of 1. But it was pretty cool because this animal actually was released and went back up into the high Arctic, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So what's this other graph for? And I have never been able to figure out how to get that to stop doing that, so I'm sorry. Basically, we're showing you here that stranding numbers were pretty much governed by harp seal strandings for a good part of the 90s and into the beginning of 2004. And right around 2007, when we started to see an increase in gray seals, we also started to see a shift in the species where gray seals have become the most commonly encountered animal that we're recovering through the stranding program. And in many years, they've beat every other species. So that's kind of an interesting trend, and we wanted to look at that a little bit more. Just to give you an indication of what we put out there, these are giving you an indication of what comes in alive. In 2001 was the busiest year we had for any strandings. We had 185 seals come in a 4-month period. We don't recommend you do that ever again. We had 44 animals in our facility at any given time, which means that at any given time we were doing something like 116 feedings a day. So it gives you an indication of how much effort goes into these. Those are harp seals. Harp seals are arctic species. There's a couple of 5 to 6 million seals that are out there. But that has changed, and it's changed now to actually seeing the gray seals occur. Our survivorship is back in the early 90s was about 50%. Now we're upwards of 70%. So we're able to rehab more animals, get more animals out, and therefore we can get more data on some of these other species. So as I mentioned, we look for changes in composition over the year to see what might be going on, see how that might reflect the population. We're trying to look at a proactive plan for dealing with seals in the sense, and that might sound like a negative, but the fact is we're going to interact with it, and everybody seems to think that seals are cute and cuddly, and although I work with them, they still do bite, and it's not something that you want to do. So I don't pet someone's dog without asking the owner. Obviously, the seals are out there on their own. I wouldn't go up to them and poke them. All that being said, they are protected animals, and you're supposed to stay 50 yards away, so nobody should have any problem with a marine mammal of any sort if you follow that guideline. And then we also want to understand when these events might occur. When are we having things that might be considered an unusual event or just a normal environmental event? So I spoke about 2007, and 2007 was a big year of firsts for us, for one. For years, we had trained about dealing with mass strandings and spoke with our counterparts up in Massachusetts. We actually have a training workshop this weekend again, where we're working for mass strandings up in Cape Cod and doing a tabletop exercise on Sunday. And it was always like, well, that never happens. Well, in 2007, we had about between 25 and 30 common dolphins in Northwest Creek on the east end of Long Island. They were there for over a week, and we were able to successfully herd a handful of those animals out. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a majority of them out, but it's the first time that this actually had occurred. We had the same event occur in the fall of that year. So in conjunction with that, we had sightings of 100 animals or so outside in the Peconic system. So getting information about what's going on in the population is really important, and also understanding that these events could occur. We'd be better prepared for them. Seal stranding season for gray seals, that's when we started to see an increase in the number of gray seals come up, as far as seeing more of them strand in February, and we have some ideas about why that might be. Giving you an indication of what we see, and I use this, you can read this, I'm not going to read the slide to you, but the real point is kids on a playground are going to get scratches, bumps, cuts, and bruises. Each species has their own characteristics of what's normal and what you can expect to see, and that's what we look at with these animals, and then once we see something that's unusual, then we start trying to dig into that a little bit more deeply. So, why is this interesting? Because as a result of the stranding program, you can see this table down here. It shows you a number of adult animals of harbor seals that we've been seeing. And they're adult females. And what it's showing is that in some cases, these animals were either pregnant or had a full-term fetus. This animal here, May 28th, 2005, I don't know if everybody remembers what that was. That was Memorial Day weekend at Smiths Point Park. So we had, 10,000 people at Smiths Point Park on Memorial Day weekend. And this pup came up. You can see this little pink thing right here. That's its umbilical cord. It's still moist. Looking at its blood values, this animal is probably 2 days old. So the indication is that harbor seals might be pupping in our waters. Because we have not seen an animal pup, we don't say that they're pupping. We just say that we had really small animals. And our program has a lot of data to show that we have really small animals in this area. This is as far back as 2005 where we have this animal up, but you can see some of these other numbers for having adults here later in the season that might have fetuses go back even into the 90s. So the key here is, what are we actually missing because people aren't reporting what they're seeing. This animal was probably abandoned on the beach if Mom was around. Once again, 10,000 people would scare the heck out of me, so I'm sure Mom didn't like it too much. You can see where all these other seals have come up based on this map on the other side. And giving you an indication of some of the things that we're talking about as far as why I think it's important for us to start to get more proactive. We can look at entanglements for gray seals that we see. We've seen a number of them over the years. We see illegal seizures where people have actually saw animals and thought they were really cute and they needed help, and they would pick them up and take them home, and whatever they were thinking, I'm not really sure. So it's a bad idea for us to not be proactive in trying to get the public to understand don't touch these animals. And I come down here, I point out that you can look at some of these years and you can see that in some years there's a strong bias towards males, which we think would be the animals that would venture out a little bit more and get themselves in harm's way. And so those become the years that we look at a little bit more closely. Obviously just showing you that here's an indication, 2007. And that's when we had the largest number of gray seal pups come up with the lanugo coat. You can look at the table up here. Most of them were males. And these animals, they weighed 16 kgs, 14 kgs. They're about 85 centimeters. So these are really young animals. So the indication is that these animals probably weren't pupped out on Muskeget and then traveled all this distance in a short period of time, which is also what started us to look at some of the other survey work that we were doing and looking at some of the sightings of animals that we've seen on some of the other items. So that leads us into our aerial survey programs. Obviously, this is a 172, which is what we do our seal surveys with. This is the DiGiovanni twin otter. It's a twin engine plane. It's what we did our large station work where we went offshore for we would go off about 200 miles and survey the New York Bight. It was the first time that survey was done. In 2004, we did that. We currently are working on a project with NOAA where we just surveyed off of Long Island, and that's how I got stuck in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Not because we were lost, but because that was part of our survey area that we ended up going up to Nova Scotia. But we would go pretty far offshore, so we would use a bigger aircraft. So what do we see? Back in 2001, we first started seeing gray seals on the eastern end of Long Island and getting reports sporadically about these animals around. We've done surveys where we survey and would fly over Great Gull and Little Gull Island, and we would see seals, harbor seals all along here. We'd see some seals along the beach here and on this point. Very rarely do we see seals on Little Gull back then. It was not a major occurrence. And then in 2005, we looked at some of our photos again, and the significance of 2005 for us is that this is when we got a digital camera. So I took a lot more photos than I would normally. So when we found some gray seals, about 10 gray seals on Big Gull Island, Great Gull Island, in the middle of that beach area. And there were still harbor seals that were hanging out. So there's 10 animals. And I don't know if any of you guys remember, but back in the 80s, it was thought that gray seals were extirpated from U.S. waters. So it was thought that we didn't have any real gray seals in the United States, and a researcher noticed gray seals starting to pup on Muskeget Island, which is on the west coast of Nantucket, and they had a handful of animals there. The last count, when you go out and fly over Muskeget Island and you go to look for gray seals, you have thousands of gray seals pupping on Muskeget Island. So that's only 3 decades ago, so there's a lot of significant changes. So remember 10. So we go back a little bit later. In the season, February, we have 29 gray seals, 86 harbor seals, and we're just going to kind of go through this. This is kind of getting a little big. This is Little Gull Island here. This is one of the photos that we have of 41 gray seals sighted on Little Gull Island. This is 2008. This is 70 gray seals. Well, it's still a lot of real estate here. It's kind of like the development of Long Island, kind of sprawling out. We can look at this. Okay, one seal. We're hopeful that they're going to go and not give us any trouble. Now, 2008, we have 190 gray seals that we sight on Little Gull Island. And I pointed out that this is on the southwest side of the lighthouse there. This is the beach area. Down over here is where they have that little dock. 195 on Little Gull Island. You can see they're kind of really taking a hold. This was actually from all the work that we do. We fly and spend money to fly in a plane, and then we looked at Google Earth on March 6th, and we found all these. This is gray seals on Little Gull Island. These are all gray seals. We flew a survey shortly after that. For just recently, we flew one this year in November. This is the earliest that we've reported this many gray seals. This is about 150 gray seals that we've seen here. Now, why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting and alarming because gray seals are going to pup in December and January. So now that we have a whole bunch of these animals hanging out, All these data that I showed you up until now about the increase in the number of gray seals in 2007 was before we had a large number of animals coming up, and we had an increase in the number of gray seal pups coming up. So our concern is if we have some of this stuff going on, we have some dark animals here, we have some light animals in here, it's possible we have mixed groups. We really need to look at this a lot more closely. One of the things we were trying to do is work on a remote camera system to get out here. Our research permit just came through, so we have the okay to do that now. Now we just have to figure out how to get out there and do that. And with the sale of the island, that's kind of changing some of the logistical issues that we have. Shinnecock Bay, same story, where when I first started doing surveys in the mid-90s, we could go out with 36 slide film, take a picture of all the haul-out sites, and we were good. Now this is Shinnecock Bay. I point this out because if everything goes according to plan this December, we will be doing a seal capture project to try and look at a health assessment of these guys in Shinnecock Bay. We will satellite tag a couple of the animals, and we will put radio tags on them to try and figure out how they move throughout all waters and use this habitat early in the season. Because all of the data that we've collected through the rescue program up until now has been on animals that have been rehabilitated and released later in the season. And what we found out from those data is that those animals actually, once we put them through rehab and we go to release them on the beach, they get out of Dodge pretty quick. They don't want to hang out with us for any reason. It might be because, well, nobody likes going back to the doctor. So in a sense, they all leave and they've left this area and they've gone up into southern New England. The benefit of that is it actually started, we've just been able to get NOAA to start including southern New England and eastern Long Island Sound in part of their survey strategy for looking at stock assessment. So we just worked on a project for the last 2 years where we're trying to get another population estimate for harbor seals. And we've done some captures in Chatham and in Rockland, and we've done some surveys to try and get a correction factor. And hopefully by the first quarter of next year, we should have a new abundance estimate for harbor seals. This is showing you many of the haul-out sites all around Long Island. The real important part here is that we're surrounded now by seals, and they're here. They're increasing. We're seeing them. We're even seeing them by Staten Island. How did the storm change a lot of those things? That'll be interesting for us to look at, but fortunately, there's a number of groups that are out there that are reporting sightings of these animals on a regular basis, so we can get an understanding of if there's any changes. Why is this a problem? Right here. Somebody, I always look at this and I'm like, well, hopefully their parents were around, but if they weren't, cool, kids will do odd things. But if their parents were around, this is a bad idea for a kid to lay down next to a seal. And they all think it's funny. These animals will bite. They could have disease, so you don't want to do this. Obviously, this seal isn't too happy about it. Everybody thinks it is. We need to really try to get a better handle on how much of a problem this could be for the general public. So we started talking about gray seals. We started talking about what we know about population, which, as I said, is very little. We're still trying to get some numbers. And then we come back to an adult gray seal that we basically had a call from our stranding counterpart in New Jersey, said that they had an adult gray seal they were trying to capture. You guys might remember this from the news a couple years back. They said they had it, that we have a big enough tank. We said, yeah, we'll take it. Thinking, well, you're all the way down in South Jersey. You're never going to get here, blah, blah, blah. Well, they called us and we'll be there in 2 hours. This animal was all the way up to Delaware. It's up by Trenton, New Jersey, all the way up to Delaware. They captured it, brought it to our facility. We put it in our rehab tank. It weighed about 250 pounds when we got it. Right now, it weighs 770, which is bigger than me, just so you know. And so the big problem we faced is what do you do with a 770-pound gray seal? And the key is, this is a trailer that we had to borrow. Well, this is being webcast. I shouldn't say that, right? So that's bad. We had to borrow a trailer and put it in a cage and try to get this animal down to the water. This is a boat ramp at Shinnecock because a gray seal had to go wherever it wanted. We couldn't really just say, hey, go do this like you do with a small seal. We put a satellite tag on this animal, and we tracked it out of Shinnecock Bay all the way up through Cape Cod Canal, which was really interesting for us, like it going through Cape Cod Canal. And every place where you see a lot of clumps is usually where the animal's on the surface more. And the interesting part is it came all the way up here, and this is Grand Manan Island here. This is Nova Scotia right here. This clump of rocks is an area where gray seals haul out at the low tide. And we had just done a survey that year and had seen seals there. Otherwise, we really wouldn't know what it was doing. But it made its way all the way back up to here. Then it's out here, and it's like Browns Bank, Roseway Basin, and it seems to be doing foraging out in this area. So here's a rehabbed animal that was up somewhere up here in the Delaware River. And once we released it, it found its way back up to where the populations are. So it gives us an indication that you might be able to use some of these rehabbed animals to get a better understanding of what they're doing and what their behaviors are. And then I bring this up because this is a ring seal that we rehabilitated, kind of a little, they look like a little turkey kind of thing, and then we plump them up a little bit. Came in January, released it in October. This track, obviously, it did not go across land here. It probably went out and around, but it came all the way up into the high Arctic. And I point this out because a colleague of ours from Alaska over here, they did some work with ring seals and released them, and they show their ring seal coming up and coming into the same area. So it's showing that these two populations might be mixing, which is interesting, and then it brings up a whole slew of issues. So the issues you might have with disease or something like that on this seaboard might be an issue that you have on that seaboard as well, because we are showing that there's mixing as a result of this N of 1. Once again, we know it's an N of 1, but I think when you have an N of 1 and then it's really cool, it kind of adds something to it. What we were able to do here is show that the dive behavior, and this is how we would assess whether or not an animal has been rehabilitated successfully, is it doing normal things that we'd think an animal would do, and it's showing that a lot of the dives that the animal had was to 5 meters, and then they got all the way down to even dives of greater than 195 meters for a ring seal, which is pretty interesting. And then dive duration is showing up to greater than 25 minutes, with the majority of the dives around 6 to 8 minutes. And some of these photos, these are photos that come in through our stranding program. Artie sent us photos over the years. Artie's done some work here with looking at animals that have been entangled and seeing them come back, which is an interesting, I'm sorry? So, thanks. So Artie has seen this one for years on end. And that's really the point, is that we're starting to see animals come back over and over again, whereas back in the 80s and 90s, we would see seals, they were all young of the year. So there's definitely a difference in our population that we need to start thinking about. If I keep ignoring those signs, I'll be doing okay, right? This graph, pretty busy, but this is just some work that we presented at the Biennial Conference of Marine Mammals last December, and it's showing how all these haul-out sites over the years, all around, whether it be Fisher's Island, Massachusetts, Jeremy Point, you're seeing that the numbers of animals are going up significantly. You're also seeing in some places the composition of those animals is changing. So we're starting to see it switch off to the yellow would be gray seals being introduced. And so we're seeing that all around the East End. And as I said earlier, we've now started to get, we just got NOAA to include the Eastern Long Island and New England as part of the counts. In the 80s, Payne and Seltzer did the work, and they included these areas, but they were not really a focal area. And now we think that this is all a major area for these animals. And we're also seeing that the animals that we radio tracked are moving up in here. From the project that we did in Rockland, we put 2 satellite tags of animals out up in Rockland, which would be somewhere up here. And we found that these animals moved all the way down to here. One was down in Plymouth for a while. So we're showing that these animals move a lot farther distance than what we previously thought. So we're going to shift gears a little bit just to talk about now some cetaceans. And I mentioned earlier that in 2005, we actually, 2004, 2005, we were able to receive some funding to do an assessment, or we were trying to do an abundance estimate for right whales and other cetaceans in the New York Bight during the winter months. And we know that right whales are seen here. We know that whales have been seen here historically. So we were looking at this. The target species were right whales. And so we put together this program. NOAA was our primary funder on this. It was supposed to be a 3-year project. Unfortunately, funding was cut for year 2 and 3. But we did get some interesting data. Unfortunately, we only got 1 right whale, which I guess when you look at a population of 380, that's pretty good anyway. But we got 1 right whale. But when you look at historical sightings all throughout the New York Bight, there's a number of animals that are in here. So getting an understanding of how they're using this might be a little bit helpful. And you might have recognized from some of those bullets up there that one of our concerns was looking at mitigation for ship strike and entanglement. And we'll talk about that in just a second. I put this up here because surveys seem really easy when you're standing on land, but this is our defense zone. These are all warning areas where the military are doing things. So when we decide to fly low and slow in a small plane around all these areas, especially around New York City, they tend to get a little nervous. So it becomes a little bit problematic for us to conduct these surveys. So systematically, we set up lines that we would fly all the way outshore. I think out here we were probably about 160 miles offshore when we finally were done with that. And it shows that how much we've sampled each one of these areas and giving you an indication that even at this, it's very low sample that we've done. We ran this project for 109 days from January through to April. And this was, as I said, 2004, 2005. You might remember it's the time that we had all those blizzards. So once again, being able to fly was a little bit more problematic to find good weather conditions. So why is this important? Well, June 18th, 2001, this is a right whale calf that came up just off of Jones Inlet. And it was called in, and we happened to be going out to do a seal survey at the time because we were going to try and survey a little bit later in the season. And they said, is there any possibility you can get a plane up to go look for this? And we said, yeah, we could do that. We'll be over the animal within 2 hours, which was really cool. It's always good to be impressive and quick at times, but it was just luck that we happened to be doing another survey. Well, we were out there. This is taken from our Cessna. This is a picture. This is the animal still bleeding out from when it was hit. So this is a calf that was born that winter. Didn't make it up. I think there were 23 calves that were born that year, if I remember correctly, and I think 5 of them actually had been taken by ship strike. So it's a significant number of animals. PBR for these animals, potential biological removal, is less than 1. So that was a bad year for right whales. So we were able to secure this animal. We did a full necropsy on it and found out that the ship strike was probably the contributory factor to its death. This is where the animal came up. So what did we find out in our surveys? Well, we found out a lot of what we did know is that if you look at this, and if I actually gave you a table of all the cetaceans that we encounter over the years, well, every one of them would be here. So the stranding numbers represent what's out there in the population. That's not a big surprise. 12 different species. The red ones are actually animals that are listed as endangered federally or in New York. The purple one, I guess, is a species of concern. We had 239 individual sightings of animals over all those days and 1,511 individual animals. So when we look at population numbers, these are all bottom numbers. This is what we know. This is what we have photos for. This is what we counted. We can work on this and put this through analysis and try to come up with an abundance estimate. The real problem with that is that it was designed as a 3-year study. So this was the first year to work out all the issues with that. We worked them all out, got everything in place, and then we didn't go out and do any other surveys. So we don't have an off-season abundance of these animals yet. We just did, as I said, I just came back from Nova Scotia, and we just flew the first survey in October. We flew these waters to try and get some abundance numbers that we'll hopefully have within a year. And this is just showing you that survey area where we've had sightings of other animals. I point this out, maybe to make us look bad, but the point is we flew, did a lot of flying, saw one right whale, and opportunistically we had other people report sightings of other animals in the area. And that's critical to let people understand that just because we see one, it doesn't mean it's the only one that's there. And then just giving you some summary of these animals that we saw. On March 13th, we had an animal, and then it was resighted all the way up in Cape Cod Bay on the 26th. The whole point is that these animals are probably moving through the area. Are they staying here that long during the winter? Probably not. But we have all these data show that these animals are here and then heading up to Cape Cod Bay. So we're able to identify them by the callosity pattern on their head. This here is an animal that was actually reported from the public, and we were able to get out there with our camera and take some photos and try to identify it, but they weren't able to identify it from any of these photos. And obviously this is unidentified, but this is an animal that was able to get out of our photo frame before that, but this is another right whale that we had. So once again, seeing a number of animals. I point this one out because this is an animal that we saw while we were doing a seal survey. We just happened to fly offshore just because, well, there was nothing else to do and we're tired of looking at all the houses. So we went and looked at the water, and then we saw another right whale. So there's probably a very underrepresented area out here of what's going on, and we hope to change that in the near future. It's supposed to be a small N. But here's fin whale that we saw. This is giving you an indication of where we've seen fin whales when we did our surveys. You remember those graphs here, but we're seeing them all out here. Pretty much every survey that we went and surveyed these areas, we did see fin whales. Same thing with humpbacks. We saw them scattered throughout the area. We've seen them obviously off of Nantucket, but also through here out towards the canyon. Harbor porpoise are the real interesting one because, well, we kind of saw them everywhere and pretty close to shore. And that's the third most commonly encountered animal by the rescue program as far as the cetacean goes. And as I said, we do have one in our tank. We have been able to rehabilitate 2 harbor porpoise in the last decade and satellite tag those animals and get them back out to the wild. But the one thing we always saw when we were out there was shipping traffic. So it's kind of a very busy area out there, and there's a lot going on. So it begs us to think about the question of saying, okay, we have a lot of animals out there, we have a lot of shipping. How much of an impact is this having? Is it a big problem? Is it a small problem? We understand the general trend towards that collisions with ships are bad, and we don't disagree with that at all. But why do we not get that many animals coming up? 2001 was the busiest year we had for ship-struck animals, where we had, I think it was 6 animals come up in 8 months. I get those numbers backwards a little bit. But we had a large number of animals come up for large whales, where we usually get 1 or 2 every couple of years. A large number come up, and we haven't had big years like that since. So what was changing out here, which shows that we need to really start looking at this a little bit more fine scale and get an understanding of what the populations might be doing that might change. Were the whales closer to shore during that year? And I'll throw this out there as just speculation, mainly because that happens to be the year we also rehabilitated the world's first Rizzo's dolphin, which is a species of dolphin that is usually found out by the shelf break. And that year, in 2004, 2005, the stranding numbers went from 5 across the region up to 17 and 15 across the region. And we think it's because we were bringing more animals onto the shelf break here. Whether there's a change in the distribution of food or whatever, hasn't been looked at, but that was an unusual year for other species as well, and we should start looking at that when we're trying to manage some of these populations. And then real quickly, I'm going to point out the last program that we did on sea turtles was a collaboration between Cornell, a cooperative extension, Cornell University, Wildlife Trust, and the Riverhead Foundation, which was a continuation of a PoundNet program that was started back in the 80s. And what we did here is we were able to try and respin up this program, try to do a health assessment, and try to get some information on sea turtles throughout the Peconics. I use these data mainly to show the difference between the number of animals that actually strand and the number of animals that we actually recover in a program when we go out and actively try to get them. What's important to note is that one of the reasons why this program is not run was more of a permitting issue than anything else. The program is run, and the pound net fishermen, which are crucial. Everybody knows what a pound net is. If not, I have a picture of it in just a second. So what we were trying to do is look at what was going on, reestablish this program, get an understanding of what was going on, conduct a health assessment, and compare the results with stranding data. We operated this program through July and November. We had a number of local fishermen. I believe we had 11 fishermen involved in the program. And what would happen is when they got a turtle, they would call us. We would go out, draw blood on the animal, get a weight, ID it, take photos, full 9 yards. Then we would put a flipper tag on it and a pit tag so that it could be tracked later on. And what was interesting is in this case, in some cases, we were able to put satellite tags on and get some turtle tracks, and I'll show you that in a second. This is a pound net. Basically, this runs perpendicular to the coastline. If this is the coastline over here, then fish come in, end up in this. Turtles do the same thing. There's no mortality associated with this pound net fishery in our waters. They do have some issues associated with that in Virginia, and they've done some work to try and mitigate that, and it seems like they've had pretty good success with a lot of those issues. The key thing here is that there's no mortality associated with this. So these are animals that are going to encounter the net, be in here, the fishermen get them, they call us, and the only thing that happens is we go out and actually take samples and get better information on life history. Because it's a state-regulated fishery and our permits are federal, we cannot get research permits to do that anymore unless we run our own fishery. So that's why that program actually ended. So it stopped a huge wealth of information. Doesn't stop the turtles from being captured or stop the turtles from ending up in these nets, but it actually stopped us from getting information about what's going on a regular basis. So that was a negative, in case we missed that. So what did we get? We got 49 greens, we got 24 Ridleys, and we got 2 loggerheads, which was interesting because loggerheads used to be predominantly encountered through the program, and now we were actually starting to see less, and we were actually starting to see more greens, which was interesting in and of itself. Green sea turtles feed predominantly on vegetation when they get to this. They're usually about 3 to 5 years of age. When they're fully grown, they're probably about 500 pounds. These animals are usually about 30 pounds or so. So basically we're introducing a species here that feeds predominantly on vegetation, as opposed to the Ridleys and the loggerhead would feed predominantly on crabs. So, as I said, 11 fishermen. Of the 75 animals we recovered, 6 were recaptured, and 3 of those animals were brought back to the rescue program to be rehabilitated because they had some other issues that were associated with them. So what do we have between 2002 and 2006? Shows that we had a handful of animals. Obviously, low numbers, this is what we're getting, less than 10, less than 25. This was the startup of the year. We started a little late. This, interestingly enough, seemed to be a byproduct of we had the program in place and we were getting a low number of animals. We didn't know why that was, but then again, the program kind of ended here. And when we look at it, this is the number of animals that stranded in the Peconics during those times. So just to give you an idea, we had 5 animals stranded in the Peconics. We had about just under 10 that came in 2002. So what we're seeing is the composition that stranding still represent a smaller portion of what's out there on a regular basis, even during the lowest year. So there's a lot more that probably is going on, a lot larger population of green sea turtles using these waters than we previously thought of. That being said, we're not having this program go on anymore, but the stranding program is still recovering animals that wash up. And we have an animal that's in our facility right now that was caught on a fishing line off of the South Shore of Long Island, off of Rockaway during the summer, where someone was fishing and it ingested the line, and it's in our facility being rehabilitated, and it's a lot smaller turtle than we normally get. So it shows us that not only the Peconics have turtles, but also the South Shore of Long Island, and we need to start looking at that a little bit more closely. This is showing the pound nets and where the turtles are coming up. Obviously, this is a bad map because they're not on the land. This would be Shinnecock Bay right here. The key component with all of this is that when we did put these turtles out, when we did put satellite tags on, we did see them start to move all out of this area, use the South Shore of Long Island, all the way down to Florida. We tracked some of these animals. And as a result of partnering with some of the people doing some of the sturgeon work on the South Shore where they have an array, we were able to use some of those sonic tags and put them on and track an animal all the way down to Florida as a result of a stranded animal. So it's giving us a better indication that these animals are not just moving through our area and not surviving, the animals moving up and down. Data that we haven't shown you is a lot of animals. We have a good bit of animals that are actually heading out offshore. I have an animal that made it almost all the way to the Azores that went out there and then kind of started to come back in. So they're probably following the Gulf Stream as they come through here and staying with the warm core rings and overwintering out here in these areas just offshore. So basically, what are our major concerns and issues? Are basically what issues do we have facing marine mammals in New York? I answer pretty simply, is it a lack of knowledge? More people that I speak to, I've been doing this for, 20 years now, and I still go out on the beach and talk to people, and we have a whale on the beach, and they'll say, wow, I had no idea whales were here. And I'm like, well, okay, have you heard of Cold Spring Harbor? And they're like, yeah, it's a whaling port. Have you heard of Sag Harbor? Yeah, it's a whaling port. I'm like, well, do you think they put them where the whales were not? And they're like, wow, that's cool. I guess they were here. And the same thing goes with seals. So we need to get people more aware that what they might see out there that they think is unusual is occurring. And also, human interaction is a big issue that we need to look at. And let's see. I think we covered all these. Oh, there you go. And that's really what we were looking at. This is an animal that was in the Rockaways, in a jetty, is stuck there. And the people were walking by fishing, and it's just kind of stuck in the rocks there. Good thing people were looking down and they saw it. We had to go rescue it. So, thank you.